When we consult history books regarding the Second World War, we are told about the significant conquests of the Third Reich, which almost led them to victory against the Allies. What is not as commonly analyzed are those collaborationist factions that, in the face of Nazi occupation, chose to join the caravan of death and hatred led by Adolf Hitler. We are talking about the traitors who chose the Axis side, betraying their fellow countrymen for a bit of power. The curious thing is that they all ended up the same way, arrested, tried, and executed. In this new video, we will review some of the most emblematic cases and how their actions affected the course of the conflict. Join us in another incredible installment of military history. The United Kingdom became a symbol of resistance against Nazi Germany, but ironically, within its aristocracy, one of the most fervent supporters of the Third Reich outside German borders was born. John Amery, the son of Leo Amery, a distinguished high-ranking official of the British Empire and a member of the Conservative Party, carried a name with weight and history in the island's politics. However, neither his nationality nor his family status is as incredible as the fact that John had Jewish ancestry, as his maternal grandparents were wealthy Hungarian Jews who had immigrated to British lands. Of course, this origin was concealed to avoid hindering his political ascent. From a young age, John Amery was a problematic and rebellious child who lived in the shadow of his successful father. As he grew older, John radicalized his anti-communist views to the point of embracing fascist ideas. He believed that this ideology was the only protective shield against the Bolsheviks and celebrated the victories of Mussolini and Hitler's men during their campaign in Europe. Besides being intolerant, Amery was a terrible businessman. After several consecutive bankruptcies, he decided to leave his homeland in 1936. With what remained of his personal fortune, he emigrated to France, where he became a major promoter of collaboration between the French and Germans. Not content with this, he sought to immerse himself in the epicenter of the global fascist movement. He attempted to move to Germany, leveraging his good relations with the leaders of the French fascist movement. But he didn't achieve this goal until September 1942, when he managed to travel to Berlin with the support of German intelligence officers. There, he suggested that the Third Reich would benefit from forming a military unit of Britons willing to fight alongside the Wehrmacht. Amery's ambitious project was well received by the SS leadership, and Heinrich Himmler authorized John to start recruiting volunteers from January 1943. He began the search among British civilians interned by German authorities in the conquered regions of Europe. Contrary to his expectations, not everyone was willing to betray their homeland and ideals with the same ease, so his task did not yield the expected results. Despite the setbacks, Amery's project continued. Thanks to him, in 1944 the Nazi front officially established the Britisches Freikorps, the unit of UK soldiers destined to fight for Germany during the war. It was precisely in that year that John gave one of the few interviews of his life. Here, we present that historic footage from Norwegian television.
How is it that you are in Germany when your own country is at war with Germany and many other European countries? Quite a lot of people will perhaps think that you're a traitor.
Well, you know, only history will be able to judge that.
My view is that it is these people, Churchill, Roosevelt and his friends, who are the real traitors. Traitors to England, traitors to our empire, to our ancestors, and worse than that, traitors to Europe, to Christianity and civilization.
His words are harsh and contradictory, but the man genuinely believed in what he said. By late 1944, John Amery managed to obtain a special permit to leave Germany. At that point, anyone leaving German territory could be suspected of treason or espionage. The Englishman chose to travel to Mussolini's devastated Italy, where he lived the last weeks of the war, awaiting the fall of the violent empire he had supported. As the Allied forces gradually advanced through Europe, with the Normandy landings being a turning point for the already weakened fascist strongholds, on April 25, 1945, a few days before Mussolini's public execution, Italian partisans captured John Amery. The English traitor was handed over to British authorities to be tried in his home country. Back in his homeland, Amery was imprisoned in Wandsworth Prison on the outskirts of London. His brother attempted to forge documents claiming that John had acquired Spanish nationality and therefore he could not be judged as a traitor to the English government. But this was dismissed. The next recommendation was to declare himself mentally ill, but the proud man was unable to claim deficiencies. The trial began on November 28, 1945, and during the process, 8 charges of high treason were read. To everyone's surprise, Amery pleaded guilty to each one. Proud until his last days, the traitor's fate was sealed, and it had a name: Albert Pierrepoint. You might wonder who that friendly gentleman was. He was the most famous executioner in the United Kingdom, a celebrity among both friends and strangers. Finally, on December 19, 1945, Amery was hanged. However, the controversial Briton was not alone in his support for Nazism. As mentioned earlier, France was one of the countries with the highest number of collaborators, and few were as infamous as Joseph Darnand, the supreme leader of the French milice. For what you have just seen is not an event in Berlin, but a military mobilization in Vichy, France, the puppet state established by the Reich on French territory. Within that structure, Joseph Darnand was one of the most important figures. But before delving into these imposing mobilizations, let's go back a bit in history. Joseph Darnand was born in Coligny, into a conservative and traditional family. His first encounter with violence was during World War I, where he fought as an ordinary soldier, receiving 7 citations of honor for bravery in battle. After the conflict, Darnand began associating with far-right political groups like the famous Action Française, which advocated for the creation of paramilitary units with a fascist orientation. His radicalization reached its most violent point in the 1930s, when, as a member of the group Le Cagoule, he carried out bomb attacks against leftist groups, paving the way for a right-wing uprising in his country. Considering this, it is not surprising that Darnand succumbed to the ultranationalist charms of leaders like Franco, Mussolini, and of course Hitler. When World War II broke out, Darnand fought for the French side, but once the Vichy state led by Philippe Pétain was established, Joseph decided to fully align himself with Nazism. Pétain was essentially the Nazi puppet in France, serving as the head of state and a complete collaborator with the Germans. To support this regime, Darnand organized his own militia, known as the Legionary Order Service, which assisted the Nazis in their fight against the French resistance. Let's listen to one of his many speeches.
À consacrer toutes mes forces à faire triompher la révolution nationale et son idéal, suivant les ordres de mes chefs et la discipline librement acceptée du SOL. SOL, debout!
You might find that final salute familiar, related to another military leader with a famous mustache. The Milice, another name by which this pro-German paramilitary group was known, was particularly dangerous for the resistance since it consisted of men who knew the territory like the back of their hand. They had detailed information about possible hideouts and meetings of rebels, as well as knowledge of the activities of those who were not willing to surrender their country to the Führer. Under German pressure, in December 1943, the government of Pierre Laval appointed Darnand as the supreme leader of the police and minister of the interior. This allowed him to step out of the Waffen-SS ranks to expand the activity and influence of the Milice, as well as concentrate his efforts on attacking the resistance and supporting the capture and deportation of Jews. Anti-Semitism was a hatred that strongly united him with the goals of the Reich and its final solution. But the efforts of the French collaborators were in vain. The countdown to their destruction had begun from the north of the country. The Normandy landing was a stab in the heart of collaborationist France. as the constant advance of Allied troops caused German infantry units to withdraw from French territory. At that moment, Marshal Pétain tried to make a desperate move, issuing statements distancing his government from the extermination of Jews and the massacre of rebellious French. However, it was Darnand himself who forced him to desist, reminding of the support that the Vichy administration had provided to the Reich. After the liberation of Paris, Darnand fled to Germany with 6,000 milice men in September 1944 to join the provisional government formed in the German town of Sigmaringen, on the banks of the Danube River. Faced with the unstoppable advance of the Allies, Darnand fled to northern Italy, along with a small combat unit of French fascists. However, after the German surrender in Italy, he was captured by the Americans and handed over in July of that year to the new French government, led by Charles de Gaulle. Accused of collaboration with the enemy and treason, Darnand was sentenced to death and executed by firing squad on October 10, 1945, bringing an end to one of the most infamous careers in the military history of France. From the land of wine and art, we travel to Scandinavian territory, an area with abundant cases of pro-Nazi collaboration. In Norway, no man was more connected to the Third Reich than Vidkun Quisling. Unlike the other names in this video, the Norwegian did not come from a political or military family but had religious ancestry. His father was a pastor of the Church of Norway, a somewhat unique version of Christianity called Universalism. Vidkun adopted a reactionary and militaristic stance, fueled by a deep disdain for communism and everything the Soviet Union represented. That's why, on April 9, 1940, with the German invasion of Norway underway, he seized power in a coup supported by the Nazis. From 1942 to 1945, Quisling served as the Prime Minister of Norway in collaboration with the National Socialist Occupation Forces. His government, known as the National Government, coexisted with an official Norwegian presidency in exile. Recognized by the Allies and based in London, Quisling's administration openly collaborated with the Third Reich, actively participating in the final solution, handing over politically suspicious citizens, Jewish families, and anyone deemed disposable. Such was the esteem he had in Berlin that in 1942, for Quisling's 55th birthday, the German government sent a delegation. These images were recorded on that day. Like many other traitors to their homeland, in 1945, Quisling realized that the war had only one possible outcome: Allied victory. The Norwegian leader tried to facilitate a peaceful transfer of power, so he ended up surrendering to the resistance after briefly negotiating to ensure fair trials for himself and his men. The Norwegian government in exile kept its promise, and once the pro-German leaders were captured, they were subjected to a legal process to review their war crimes. Quisling's trial began on August 20, 1945. The defense focused on downplaying his connection with Germany and emphasizing that he had fought for complete independence, something that seemed entirely contrary to the memories of many Norwegians. Fortunately, Quisling's trial was filmed, so these images reach us today to see the face of the most brutal Scandinavian collaborator on the day he was informed of the penalty he would face: death. Quisling was executed by a firing squad at Akershus Fortress on October 24, 1945. The clock struck 2:40 when the life of the most infamous Norwegian of World War II was extinguished. His last words were, "I was unjustly convicted, and I die innocent." After his death, his body was cremated and the ashes were buried. Now it's time to meet the last traitors in this presentation. The case of Hungary during World War II was quite complex. Throughout the conflict, the Hungarian people endured harsh living conditions, famines, battles, and mistreatment from various fronts. To add another page to their book of hardships, in 1944, Hungary was occupied by German forces. The entry of the Third Reich into Hungarian territory not only sparked strong resistance and the emergence of partisans, but also allowed many local anti-Semitic movements to flourish. In this Central European country, numerous far-right parties existed, advocating for the deportation or extermination of Jews, much like the Nazis. At the forefront of these groups were men like László Endre and László Baky, two infamous names in Hungarian history. The two Lászlós closely collaborated with the SS in the identification and annihilation of citizens of Jewish descent, so much so that they became the right-hand men of Adolf Eichmann in the region. We are talking about László Endre and László Baky gaining the trust of the man responsible for the Holocaust and the final solution. In multiple letters and documents, they claim not only to be part of the mass transportation of victims, but also to agree with the benefits of genocide. It is estimated that, thanks to their macabre work, tens of thousands of compatriots perished in German gas chambers in a matter of months. In hell, there is a special place reserved for people like Endre and Baky, who not only commit murder but also betray their peers and hand their country over to invading forces. In March 1945, Budapest was captured by the Red Army. László Endre tried to hide in Austria, but was captured and sent back to his country. Baky faced an almost identical fate, being captured by the Soviets during that offensive. After a long year in prison, both were tried alongside their collaborators. It wasn't difficult to prove their crimes, as there is ample evidence of their involvement in the infamous final solution. What you will see next was filmed on March 29, 1946, the day when the cursed Lászlós of Hungary were executed. We assure you that it is not necessary to understand the language to grasp the significance of this footage.
Baky László és Endre László a nyilas uralom legelvetemültebb tribékjei leltek a nemzettel szemben elkövetett vétkeikért. Uralkodásuk idején példátlan szadizmussal ölették meg, vagy deportáltatták a magyarság ezreit. Cinizmusuk és kenes világszerte megdöbbenést és felháborodást keltek.
Even though they are abominable beings, we cannot show you the exact second when the rope ended the lives of Hungary's murderers. Nevertheless, with the images you have seen, you can get an idea of how their careers concluded. As we mentioned in the introduction, World War II was not only filled with death and destruction, but also with traitors, men who chose the criminal side, assuming it would be the victor. Fortunately, history turned its back on them, and their crimes were judged just like those committed by the leaders of the Third Reich. With that, we reach the end of this video. If you want to continue learning about stories like this, we invite you to subscribe and activate the notifications on our channel. For now, we bid farewell until the next installment of Military History. Thank you for joining us.